to change this. This is a crossroads moment in our human history. I just feel like people now are so disenfranchised, they become so broken down. I saw it happen after September 11th. It shocked North America to realize that they were the bad guys. And that's really what I felt when I was younger and I saw that. You know, they hate you because you don't know why they hate you. Because you've been cocooned. Because other people have had to dance a dance around your comfort. But now we're tired. Now it's gone to a point where we are permitted to be assaulted. And the people that my money goes to protect me stand there and smirk. So you have to wonder, what kind of a democracy we are in? Well, we're not. We are in an oligarchy. Just because we call it a democracy to make ourselves feel better isn't really the truth. But I also know that when people mobilize, when people care, when people don't do things like as something like a hobby or interest, but as a way of lived existence for one another, things do change. There is no quick solution. You know, it's like a rally. You just keep passing that baton. You just keep moving that baton forward. When I think of the future right now, I don't know exactly which direction we're going to go or where we're going to land right now. It really is in the hands of everybody that's out there. And after 9/11, when people were shocked that they were viewed as the enemy, an imperialist tyrant against the rest of the world, it shocked people to their system. Their innocence was lost. But innocence is the crime. And instead of dealing with this, instead of demanding more from their governments, from their politicians, you know, people make these politicians to be so bad so that they can absolve themselves of guilt. Well, you elected them. And when you do elect them, do you hold them accountable? You know, we've been involved in wars since September 11th. We've lost Canadian soldiers. And it was a war that just seemed to be happening over there for most of North America. But for people who know people in that region, it was not. The ripple effect of that war, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, in Yemen right now, they're on the brink of famine. They don't know if the famine has already started. And that is in a direct correlation to our policies in the Middle East over the last 50 years. We did this to ourselves. We tried to escape reality by going into reality television. We tried to escape society by going into social media. But if this year is any indication, you cannot escape yourself. You must face the ugliness of what has been allowed to endure. You know, I try people like Donald Trump as these, you know, larger than life tyrants. He's a symptom of a society. When I see what I saw in Red Deer, I'm not shocked. It's a symptom of the society that I've been experiencing and surviving in most of my life. So I guess what I kind of want to end off on is that I want to go back to Black Lives Matter. So Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, the three people who started Black Lives Matter, they created the guidelines for our future. And I think that they are a perfect way to end. The first, lead with love. The second, low ego, high impact. And the third, move at the speed of trust. And so I guess what I want to say is, can you prove to us that we can trust you finally, to have our backs? Can we trust you to do the right thing this time and not give up when it gets tired? And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hit me right in the heart. Thank you, Miss K. So just before we get to questions, I'm just going to say a final statement. Change can't happen until we all collectively see that change must happen. And those who have privilege actually have to put in the work to see other perspectives. Otherwise, we are blind to it. So thank you for listening today. And we will definitely do this again in an effort to continue to share knowledge and information and break through these perspectives. So I'm just going to open up if there's any questions for any of the guests. Fire them in now. Or was it just so well explained that no one has any questions? No one at all. Not a single question.
I did want to just point out something really quick with the last speaker, Ms. Kay. The one thing I wanted to touch on was the idea of democracy coming from here. I'm just trying to fix my camera. The idea of democracy and indigenous peoples holding it. There are different forms of governance systems that we've had clear across Turtle Island. And I know a lot of what they, only because I spent time with them, the Haudenosaunee, specifically the Mohawk people within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, that a lot of their ideas were based off of their interaction with them and how they governed themselves. But the way the Haudenosaunee govern themselves as opposed to how the Blackfoot is like night and day. It's two different ideological views. There's a relationship with the land, but how we go about conducting ourselves is different. And it's really, I think we need to be careful about how we envision indigenous folks and their governance systems. I mean, because I wouldn't consider what we have as Siksikaitsitapi people as democracy. And I wouldn't, as a person who spent time, I don't have any authority to speak on the Haudenosaunee, but my view as a Siksikaitsitapi looking at them is that democracy would be such a limiting word to what they have traditionally, because what they had was bigger than the concept of democracy. With their condolence chiefs, with their clan mothers, with their clan systems, what they had is actually the next level from democracy. Like there was that one book, Call Me Ishmael or whatever, and people often look at this society as being it, and this is it. There's nothing really going to be greater. The Haudenosaunee have it, and like Blackfoot's Siksikaitsitapi people, we have this evolved way of being as well. But I wouldn't label it as democracy. You could, I mean, if people need to conceptualize, they need to call it democracy. You can kind of, but it is just, it's very limiting. That's all I wanted to add to that.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you for going more in depth with that, because I was running out of time, but that is the key point, is that for a lot of people who are colonizers, settlers, that concept of democracy begins and ends with these, well, written artifacts, but those oral traditions and those specific to land and relationship to land are so in-depth, complex, and sophisticated that you're right. You have to go above and beyond that, right? It has to go further and deeper into those structures. So I'm glad that you clarified and went deeper on that, because it's sometimes I forget that to settler colonizers, when you say democracy, it's on a limited spectrum. And so you come from that indigenous worldview, like I'm personally from Robinson Superior Territory, and knowing that history, there's an excellent speech by Sakej Ward on the difference between being a guest and an occupier, which I would encourage anybody to watch. But I just saw a couple questions come in, so I didn't want to, but thank you, Gitz, for clarifying.
Okay, so the first question that came in is, what are other ways we can do to help? So Taylor's posting some links in the chat right now for Rural Alberta Against Racism. If you want to donate to them, also some of your the money, the donations for the tickets will go to them. Okay.
I also when I was doing some of my research, there's a new section of research called the Non-for-Profit Industrial Complex. I would encourage anyone to start reading into that. It's much like, when we have these industrial complexes, like the prison industrial complex, the non-for-profit industrial complex actually talks about surveillance by officials on local organizational groups to figure out where money is going and which causes that money is targeted towards. And what ends up happening is that the money stays at the top and the people at the bottom who are doing the groundwork, who actually represent the people that they're actually helping, because usually the people in that work, like for one of my friends who's a Black trans activist, she was burnt out by this system. And she was one of the first people to bring my attention to this issue. So I just, when it comes to donations and things, it's always good and it's always a better idea to go very local, to go and find people within your locales that are doing this work. Wetaskiwin is a great example. You know, the homeless shelter, the hub, was reopened because of the work and the diligence of Black and Indigenous Lives Matter and our friend Keisha Daniels and her work. Those types of local things keep the money centralized. It keeps it going back. It floods it back. And if you look into how economies work within this capitalistic settler culture, that money, although it might be going to a cause, you really want to follow the breadcrumbs on that and ensure that it's actually getting to the people that need it most and going into the groundwork, to the street work.
And so yeah, besides the monetary way you can help, you can also help by coming to protests. You can find the protests specifically pertaining to this on Rural Alberta Against Racism.
We have, I'm just going to speak. I'm in the background. I'm here. But we do have a private group on Facebook called Alberta Protests and Community Discussions. We used to have calendars pinned to the top of our Facebook page, but these hate groups ended up starting to use those to find us. So I've since made it a private group on Facebook. It may take a little bit for you to get in there because we do screen every single profile. We check you out. If your profile is completely locked down and we can't see anything, we may request that we become friends on Facebook first so we can look and see what you're about. But that would be a really great way to see what's coming up. And there is a lot. There's always something every weekend. There's some stuff during the week. So definitely join that if you can.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is,
sorry. I just wanted to really thank the panel that was on. You're all amazing. You all have in-depth amount of crazy information, which is amazing. So that's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Gibbs. You too.
Thank you.
This was so great.
Next question is, does this group see any value in doing a talk on the intersectionality of feminism and minority? Yes. Me specifically, though, like Rural Alberta Against Racism and Gitz's work and my work, all different work. So the community, Calgary, we do feminism. We do feminism hard, definitely. Okay, thank you to everyone sending your love. How can I continue to support either physically or financially? Rural Alberta Against Racism, also getscrazyboy.com. Also showing up to the event and just asking the event organizers, especially like locally in your community, whoever's doing the events that you resonate with, go to the event, find the organizer, ask them what they need. They will let you know.
Yeah, I'm just going to add into that really quick too, is that we found too, when people start coming out, even just to one, and you start connecting with people more on a personal level and hearing their stories and seeing their needs and seeing what the community needs, people quickly just find their place within this. I think a lot of people are still standing back, not knowing what to do, not knowing what their part is, what they're supposed to be saying or doing, which is why there's not a lot of action being taken. But once you get out there and you meet people and you speak with people, you quickly find what your role is within all of this. And it's like becoming a parent. It just becomes natural.
Definitely. So Rachel says she's giving suggestions. So yes, attending protests, learning more, sharing with others, educating others. Educating others is a toughie because you got to look face to face with people that you don't want to have this conversation with, friends or family, and just tell them, no, and this is what I learned, and this is why. Gits, you want to say something?
Yeah, just in town and abroad, support Black and brown businesses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely. are there other things we should be doing as well that can help make a greater impact for change when it comes to systemic racism, when it comes to our institutions? Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm confronting these institutions in whatever way you're comfortable with, and just, maybe sometimes, white people sometimes don't know what they're doing is racist, and they are anti-racist people. So if you point out to them what is happening in the institution that is racist, systemically racist, blatantly racist, they will, hopefully they should intervene. And if they don't, tell me. No, I'm just kidding. Just joking. I hope that answers your question.
I was going to say, if I can add, the proposed education that the UCP is trying to administer within the Alberta, the Alberta province, is garbage.
Yes, really it is.
It's just like a cesspool for ignorance, and from this ignorance, you're going to see all this other shit perpetuated. So I tried to show you what a bit of ignorance does with Indigenous peoples, and how it kind of grew into the made up fake fucking oppressive rainbow warriors. When you give people the wrong idea of things, you're just going to have a lot of bad ideologies that come out of there. And it's so detrimental to us as people moving forward. If you can oppose this in your local district, if you can oppose this with superintendents, just by all means get out there, right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, training doesn't work. Because if it worked, we wouldn't be in this problem. There's actually less law enforcement who are people of color in the United States since 1983. It's actually gone down. And when those first, I don't even call them protests or riots, I call them insurrections. When a person has been put down that long, that is an insurrection. And, a little bit of training, which, let's be honest, is kind of like a check mark. I mean, we know how corrupted these offices can be. We know that the people who usually get promoted are sometimes not the best person for the job. And for a lot of people, training in any respect, think about your first jobs. It was a check mark. And in order to, we need screening processes. We need complete reform. I always like to give this example to people. When we talk about capitalism, which fuels police, which fuels universities making taser shields for police, that it's this disgusting thing of violence and despair that just keeps working itself out. When I think of let's say Adam Smith being brought back from the dead, if we were to explain to him the inequalities in our society and how they do intersect, he wouldn't even understand what you were talking about. The man didn't even know what the light bulb was. And yet we still run our basic values in our institutions, which are run off of this capitalistic enterprise, which directly relates to, think about it. Why were those lands taken? Money, capitalism, power. Why were Black people brought to America from Africa? Economic purposes. So what we have right now, and what I saw a question just say what an oligarchy is. What an oligarchy is a very small group of very wealthy people who run everything. And that is what we're in. I read a statistic recently that, I have to wonder why these guys are screaming at me for their life being so terrible. When between March and June of this pandemic, Jeff Bezos made $48 billion by pandemic profiteering and raising the prices of things 1,000%. Those inequalities have just become a thing that people think our democracy or our life can be. I don't think we actually know what democracy is or have ever known. It's never really existed, even for when we talk about white people and white women in particular. Suffragettes were being killed. Suffragettes were being beaten up by cops. I look at my friends in Louisville right now. They're being held in a baseball stadium, just like people were held in the G20 protests in Toronto. And what you see as these institutions begin to crumble is this rise of neo-fascism, and this neo-fascist lens which contributes to a model of white supremacy. And the best thing that white people can do right now is to call it out, to call themselves out, to call other people out, to make it uncomfortable for other people to maintain those narratives about themselves and the way that they see the world. Because the bubble has burst, and I personally don't like where this train is going, and I would like to get off now.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that we can have a revolution that can be bloodless if we want it. But apparently, it's looking like people have become so voyeuristic on these issues, they forget that these are the lives of real people. And a lot of the voices that are the most important to hear, you know, we don't hear them because they're homeless on the street, because they are a person with disabilities. And these are how these things intersect and how injustice perpetuates in society. That's all I want to say.
So much.
So it is 5, but I'm going to keep going with questions just for another like 10 minutes or so. So just to say a final thing on what can you do with 4 institutions, like look at what Mount Royal did yesterday.
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yesterday, they demanded that they wanted anti-racist education and were only met by 4 counter-protesters.
Woo!
Yay. What are the most tangible actions that you want to see from white people as the way to support? I'm not going to answer this question. Taylor, Miss K, Crit, Gibbs.
I'm sorry, what was the question again? How they can support?
What are the most tangible actions that you want to see from white people as a way to support?
Oh my God, I gotta move the camera for this one, sorry. We just want you to show up. That's it. We just need people showing up. Please. We're getting tired, and soon we're going to have to pass on the torch. And so we can just have a nap or go for brunch with our friend. I would love to go for brunch. I can't even do that. Just show up, please.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so there's a lot of thank yous in here. That's wonderful.
I would say that you need to be identified as a race traitor by these hate groups. Like, that's how you know you're doing the actual work. And you can take direction from people at the marches or rallies, Facebook groups. I, for one, am a big fan of white folks spending their money in our communities and passing on some of it, because that helps us to build our empires, and that helps us to support what we, our shit. And oftentimes, like, just white people, the settler colonial mentality comes into mind certain things, and then they just steal that for themselves. So, like, I'm a big fan of everybody coming in and buying our shit. Come to the Reds, buy some gas, go to the casino, spend some money, get your hair done. There's a bunch of different black and brown businesses to support. I would say that's one. The other thing is being identified as a race trader. Really looking at your community that you're in right now and how black or brown friendly is it, and if there's a march happening for Joey English, a Blackfoot lady who was murdered by her boyfriend at the time was a drug dealer. He was a white guy, murdered her, chopped up her body, drove around Calgary, and was like trying to get rid of her body. That's how he got rid of the body. What he was charged with was, I think, improper disposal of human remains, and that's all he was charged with. They're having a walk. Her mother's having a walk from Begunny to Calgary. So if y'all can show up at certain parts or reshare the story, the more people we have throughout the whole experience, especially at the end, will bring this story out to the Canadian populace, and that's essentially what we're going to really be needing. So that's one of the things I can just think of right now.
Oh, thank you. Some good opinions in here.
Sorry, someone just pointed out it's going to be ending October 4th at Olympic Plaza. So we'll have the information up, but we need as many people as you can to come down and pack with masks. Okay, with masks to come out on that day.
Some comments. How do we move forward from the Red Deer incident? Do you think they will escalate their violence? I mean, the world is watching, so please, Miss K.
Here's the thing, guys. Red Deer happens every day to people of color.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a one-off incident. That's just going about your day when you are a person of color. And that, in a nutshell, is the privilege that white people get to have in occupying their innocence. For someone like me, yep, it was shocking, but I mean, no more shocking than being assaulted in a Homeland Security room. No more shocking than my friend's father being taken to an offsite for years and being tortured through sound torture until he confessed to being a member of the Taliban, which he never did, and he was never charged. You know, you have so many rights you take for granted that have already been revoked from people of color. That's why I always sit there and I'm like, why am I the one still here alone? This would go away if 200 people had showed up that day.
Mm-hmm.
200 people had showed up that day. I guarantee you that crowd would have been in some way kept under control. And, you know, I'm sorry if it ruins pumpkin spice latte season.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. But I'm tired. I'm very tired. I can't tell you how many times I've told people to show up. There is a place to move from the Red Deer incident. The next events should have more than 50 people. The next events should have 100, 200, 300. They should all be wearing masks and be socially distanced. And in fact, the social distancing helps out more because you take up more space. But there is no coupon. There is no punch pass to like liberation. You know, we had to leave because, you know, somebody could have been seriously injured, possibly killed had we stayed. But you've already seen kids in Birmingham in the 60s being sprayed with hoses. You've already seen people driving through on the pipeline protests, trying to murder people on these railroads. When did your livelihood become more important than our lives? That's what I need to understand. Because that's what I'm talking about in terms of sympathy and empathy. People of color have said time and time again what we need, but we only get met with halfway. And when you've already been pushed so far back, when you try to meet them halfway, there's still a gap. So it's time to stand up. It's time. If you've ever wondered what you would have done during the civil rights era when you saw those videos of Martin Luther King and thought to yourself, I would have been one of those white people back behind him with the "We Shall Overcome" with the dogs on me. Well, look in the mirror, because whatever you're doing right now is exactly what you would have done then. Because this is the biggest civil rights movement in world history. It is a global movement right now. You can see the signs ranging from Portugal to Brazil to Britain to Ireland. Today, my friend in Ireland just sent me Black Lives Matter written in cork. So this is an us problem. This is wanting permission to just stay at home. And I'm not going to give it anymore. You got to come out. You got to.
Amen.
Yes. Our creature comforts are not as important as civil rights. Just be real about that.
I'm just getting the information for that walk for Joey. I'll be posting it on the chat thingy. So I think it's over here. But you'll find it in a couple minutes.
Perfect.
What was that last question? I forgot I was going to add something to it.
Oh, how do we move forward from the Red Deer incident? Do you think they will escalate their violence?
Oh, shit, yeah. They'll definitely escalate their violence. They're testing the waters right now, and they're testing... there's a couple things that are happening. One is they're testing the waters, and two, they're testing the response from people. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they'll spin was the one guy being assaulted by a gush of air who dived at Taylor because they want to spin that to show their fan base and people who are on the fence that we are, or they can project the idea that this group of Black and brown people are angry and violent. Well, they themselves are perpetuating the violence. I know that there was a couple people in that video with Taylor who also were at the Trump rally here in town, who assaulted 2 Indigenous women and threatened one of them. We have that on video, and we're just waiting for them to press charges. But they were specifically those people you can find. So, and some of the reports that I got out of this was one of the guys actually grabbed the girl, one of the women by her throat and then pushed her. So there is an escalation, and the only way we can curb this is if more and more people come out and tell them that they're just not wanted. They got a caravan from like different small towns to come to Red Deer. So if Red Deer people showed up and said, "Get the fuck out of here," it changes the narrative a lot. And again, like this is what I mean by becoming a race trader, because the second you do this, you get identified as a race trader, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is the search for equality, like actual justice, something that's been denied to all of us since before I was born and since before Taylor was born. We want to get to a place where we have some equal footing. We want to get to a place where we're actually heard in our concerns for each other. And the most fucked up thing about all of this is, before like I want to turn my mic off, is if what is happening to Indigenous women is happening to these white people, like the Proud Boys, like if they if it was the same injustice, there's enough empathy that I'd be like, fuck, I know what that's like to have friends who've been murdered and the police do nothing about it, and they want to call attention. Like I would be like, I would like have, there would be a moment where I'm like, okay, this is something we can like build off of. I wouldn't go to their protest and be like, Native women die too. All lives matter. Like that's not within me, because when you're in it, you actually develop some empathy for the situations other people go through. Anyways, that's all I want to say.
And I just want to applaud Gifts, because yeah, that times 1,000. And it's like this thing where, we empathize with who we relate to. So if you empathize more with that side, that event is going to set a tone for any social justice event this time, like passing it. These people will definitely escalate. They'll escalate for as long as the institutions appear that they're crumbling. And, this is why sometimes when we bring out statistics, they create more of a gap, because every time I see a number, that's a life. That's a human. They had good relationships with like their convenience store clerk. Their families missed them. This is so deeply personal. And, there's a reason why there is no equivalency of the Ku Klux Klan in Black and Indigenous culture. Oppressed people typically want to end oppression. One of the things that a lot of my white friends were saying was like, oh, I wish I had experienced racism so I could know what you're going through. And I'd look at them like they were crazy. I don't want you to experience this. It's terrible. It's dehumanizing. It creates a feedback loop where no matter what you do, you feel like it's always 9 steps back. And this is treating Indigenous lives, Black lives, the lives of people of color as lives that matter to white people is something that only white people can do. We are trying to dig ourselves out, and dirt keeps getting thrown in our faces, sometimes literally. The other thing that I find very disturbing with these hate groups, and I'm glad Gitz brought this up too, with the assault that was committed against these 2 Indigenous women, these groups are using this pandemic to terrorize. I've recently seen intel where they already have spit on people, but they are actually recruiting people that they know have COVID to send them out to wherever communities are, to try to infect communities and activists who are out there. This is biological warfare. It goes all the way back to those blankets. And this is something that only white people can do. I can't tell you how to be more empathetic to people of color, because as a person of color, and as somebody who has not internalized the racism so much that I hate myself and other people who look like me, it's just the only way I know how to be, because I just don't want anyone to experience what I've experienced. But if you've lived a life where your issues have been personal and, yes, they're attached to systemic problems, but the reason why intersectionality sometimes fails us is only because it allows us the opportunity to talk about the other issue attached to the issue of race. Race came first. Race is the issue that nobody wants to talk about, because if you talk about it, you might have to admit that you benefit from it. And every time one of these people gets off, every time people like rationalize their behavior, it makes the lives of people of color a lot more insecure and dangerous. It sets a tone, it sets a narrative out. Don't even stick up for yourself, because no one will stick up for you. And that is only a narrative that white people can change right now, by showing people that you care. If it was your child, you would care. I mean, if you have an anxiety attack because you're late to work or for your hair appointment, you should have an anxiety attack when you're late to a protest, if you care. If you can drive across the city to drop your kid off at school, but you can't drive across the city or an hour out of town, how much do you really care? And that's all I got.
So there's still about 5 more questions, so let's plow through them. But just to address the red deer.
I got like one more little thing left about these little towns. It's like really quick. You could be saying like, that's not my red deer, right? That's not my little town. I can fucking guarantee you historically that is your town. If you have elders in the area, white elders, you can ask them about the time where they were able to call the police and have Indigenous peoples removed, because that is the reality of it. The beauty of where we're at right now is it doesn't always have to be that. It could be something different. Like, we're in this place where we have to force the change. And that's one of those things. Show up when you hear these hate groups are showing up, and just tell them to get the fuck out of your city, get out of your neighborhood, get out of your town. Because that's how the mentality can change. It's not going to be these like these civil discourses where these people kind of retreat to these right extreme talking points, you know, where it's like, oh, the real problem with Black Lives Matter is black on black crime. Like, these things help to break down the actual conversation. You need to get these fucking people out, make them ashamed, make them, you know, scared that to show up, because you don't want them there. This hate perpetuates hate.
Yeah, no, that's very true. It's very true. I'd like to kind of continue on that. Like, the people that came to Red Deer were conspiracy theorists. You can watch their press conference. They tried to have a press conference because this white guy tried to make this anti-racism rally about himself, and that's a whole nother topic. But he went on to say that we were like that. The organization was funded by the NDP. First, we were funded by George Soros. Now we're funded by the NDP. We're Antifa from the United States. Like, these hate groups, I can't even begin to express how much misinformation they've digested, and then they show up violently. So showing up and just explaining to them that, like, this is truly an anti-racist rally. This is not Antifa sent by George Soros. This is a real problem that is happening right now, unfortunately.
I think it's important too to note that it's not even when we do discussions, you just move your mouth like you're talking. When we started Rural Alberta Against Racism, it was very important to ensure that we let these communities know we are doing community discussions. We don't call them rallies. We don't call them protests. We literally come in, we stay in one location. We have guest speakers. We have snacks and water and juice boxes, and we just hang out and talk about what's happening in the world and our experiences. And you know, there's been no rioting in Canada yet. There's been no looting. There's been no burning of buildings. I mean, the only rioting I've ever seen in Canada is when a white person's mad that their hockey team has lost. You know, we are literally coming into these areas completely peaceful, and they are digesting so much Fox News and Trump tweets that they think we are coming there to do, you know, what they see happening in the news. So everything's been very peaceful.
Yeah.
And like, I always hate when we say Antifa because it takes you 20 minutes to explain what that actually is. It's anti-fascist, and these people were trying to make it sound more Latino, just like they said they've done that a million times before. But like, and Antifa is a small group that does its own thing, if they even mobilize under that name, which some places are. But like, even Italians who invented the word fascist, like Mussolini with fascismo, they don't even like being called fascist anymore. So unless you like Hitler, sorry to break it to you, you're anti-fascist.
Mm-hmm.
You want to call yourself Antifa is your own personal description, but I think we can even end it there. Like, these people have become so indoctrinated. I think the lockdown contributed to that. And, you know, we know that on social media, those algorithms bend towards Holocaust denial. The anti-Semitic, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, because those algorithms run on a server that is trying to amass more data. And the way that they amass more data is by making people angry, insecure, or hateful. So what we're up against is the more white people that are out there showing that this is the past, not the future, of white identity. And let's be honest, white people, y'all were colonized by the Romans. You were Gaelic, you were Druid, you were Goths, you were colonized too. Divide and conquer, the same tricks got used on you, and all these hundreds of years later, you forget. But it's important that you don't forget. It's important that we recognize that there were people throughout history that found hope in resistance, that found hope in recognizing that if you don't even like yourself, don't worry about it. Go out there and make somebody else's life better. Because no matter what anybody says about you, if you can do that for other people, it's hard to look at yourself in the mirror and say you're doing nothing. So yeah, I honestly, this conspiracy theory stuff, there's an excellent documentary on YouTube that's been broken up. Unfortunately, it's a social media. Here we are in our lived reality. But it was on PBS, and it's called Pulling the Thread. I would highly recommend checking that out if you have the time. Going on YouTube, they have it broken down into segments of how this all happened and the ways to combat this psychological warfare that's being done through misinformation. That's coming up from America in particular, but it's already originating in Canada in a lot of ways. You even see it in our own history books, in the rewritten history of what happened to Indigenous people on this land in Turtle Island. So it's important that when you show up, we remain peaceful, no matter what. Nobody's trying to be a martyr out here, you know, but it has to happen like yesterday, because we were warning about this happening 3 months ago, and so many people still didn't show up.
And one more thing, that's the thing about constructing white comfort, that Antifa prevents them from learning. It's these things like all lives matter at your Antifa. The 2 Indigenous women that were assaulted down at Olympic Plaza by these pro-Trump rally they had, that's what they said to them. And these women, they're from the res. They're not Antifa. They were on a date downtown. They saw all this stuff, and they went and they approached these people. But that's how crazy it is. That's like literally how crazy it is. They fully believe and give themselves into this insane ideology of these like everything that's against them is apparently Antifa. I don't know, it's weird. But I mean, like, it'd be kind of cool to get a check from George Soros. I would fucking laminate that shit and I would show everybody George Soros and the amount of money. But like, no, I think if you love this country, your first stance should be as a person who's against fascism, anti-fascism. I mean, if you're pro-fascism, then You hate all the guys that stormed the beach of Normandy. You hate all of our veterans that are fighting to free that country from all that. It's really fucked up. It's a really fucked up ideology.
There's 4 more questions in here. We're going to plow through them. 2 of them are kind of similar to what we just did, so I'm going to go for the big one first. It says, I'm a white settler co-facilitating a presentation on Orange Shirt Day to students in my Rehab Med cohort. This Wednesday, we are going to be discussing how to do future culturally sensitive and harm-reducing assignments on residential school survivors of every generation impacted. Do the panelists have any comments to contribute on this matter? That would be a whole other thing we could talk about that for like an hour. How can these students, as future therapists, advocate for Indigenous folks better in the healthcare system? I mean, get training. But Gits, do you have anything to add to this one?
I mean, I would just quickly ask, like, she says co-facilitator. I'm assuming the other person would be an Indigenous person teaching this. Yes? I would hope so.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it's Miss O.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I don't get to have anything to add.
I think that it's important to point out that residential schools started off as a thing of good intentions, one of many good intention programs, policies and legislation from the Canadian government, both on the liberal and the conservative side. Like, the liberals don't get out of this, conservatives don't get out of this. It's basically the same group really trying to take control of Indigenous folks.
Oh, no.
So all these non-Indigenous folks that were there, they would totally have been on board and fully supporting it. There's very select people that were critical about it. One of the peoples that was critical was a Dr. Bryce, and he wrote a report in the early 1900s about how fucking crazy and insane and dangerous those schools were for Indigenous youth, and it went nowhere. So if you frame the conversation that you're about to have with the students as, and this is the exact same way you should frame all conversations as John A. MacDonald, he's a white supremacist. The idea behind it was white supremacy. You can actually dive into it from an authentic place of learning. When you can actually do that, if you don't do that, it's really disingenuous and dishonest. But if you can start from that place and you give 99.9% of your time to the Indigenous voice, or you should have Indigenous voices, you might come out with some learning out of it. But you need to frame it as this thing was set there for white supremacy, to kill Indigenous peoples, to kill the culture in our people, and to exploit who we were. And that's all that really came out of those fucking things. I mean, yeah, if everybody that's on this is going to order a book, I would recommend 21 Things You Might Not Know About the Indian Act, which is right here. This is like a must read. It kind of gets into it. If you're in Treaty 7, The True Intention of Treaty 7, there's another book you can read. But yeah, I think it was just the gauntlet. I brought up D-Day a second ago. The D-Day, like the storming the beach of Normandy, had a survival rate of 50%. Most residential schools had a survival rate of 50%, which means that like who you started your kindergarten with to the day that you left, half of them had died. That last school that closed in Saskatchewan, the 1996, in the early 1900s, the survival rate for that was 25%, and that was only what they were reporting. They're nothing more than fucking death schools. I could go on and on and on, but that's all I'm going to say for now.
Yeah, like that could be a whole nother 2-hour topic, to be honest. I'm going to kind of squish 2 questions together. So how can I, as an impoverished person, help? Also, how can white people be better allies? Honestly, whatever you can do, if you're sharing events, if you're telling your friends about events, if you're having uncomfortable conversations with people, if you're, you know what I mean? If you can't be there physically, trying to get other people there, sharing information, all good. all good things to do, you know. The person who wrote that, I know you're being a good ally. I know you're doing a good job, Alex. So the last two big questions before we taper off, I'm going to say them at the same time and we'll address them separately. So the first one is for Gits. If you want to throw in the comments or address in person, it's up to you. Resources to learn for governing systems within Indigenous people. So how would a white person learn about the governing systems of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island?
Depends on the group, depends on the nation. Historically, there's a lot of distrust between us, and even like today, white people, non-Indigenous people is coming in. So if you get rejected, just like, that's it. That's just history playing out. We've noticed that some people are writing dissertations and come in and steal and mine, and then they don't come back. So if your interest is solely one of education, there has to be reciprocation. So you have to be giving something to the people, to the nation. And that takes a lot of forms, but there has to be the reciprocation. Whatever you're going to get, and I guarantee you it's going to change your life for the better, you have to be putting something back into the community that's going to affect the community for the rest of your life. And if that means you have to keep going back to keep giving, then that's what you're going to have to do, because everything else is just bullshit. Really, I don't care if you're just saying like, oh, thank you for these Native people bestowing like generations of knowledge. We're so goddamn cool with our shit. Like I sit down and I listen to things people theorize about Marxism, and I'm so fucking bored. Same thing with like communism or socialism or like mixed economies. I'm like fucking dead bored. When I'm sitting with my people, or I'm sitting with a nation, and I'm just watching, it's some of the most coolly, deeply connected way of being on the planet. And it's a little different in every community. Even within the Blackfoot nations, there's little differences here and there. But when you go from Blackfoot to the Mohawk, or you go from Blackfoot to like the Dene or the Chimchian or the Wet'suwet'en people, it's like night and day.
So much pride.
But yeah, I mean, whatever it is that you're trying to seek, your reciprocation needs to be at that same level of impact for the community, because that's like the most authentic and most beautiful way to be.
Socialism bores them, but he used socialism.
Perfect. Yeah. I think I've skimmed through the rest of them. Taylor noticed one that I didn't. But the last question that I noticed, and then we'll go to the one Taylor found, was, Taylor, can you please share some of the beautiful successes and excellent things that have come out of rural Alberta protests, as we don't often get to hear about those, which is a fair point. We don't. But you know what, if it was all sunshines and rainbows, then maybe we wouldn't be able to get as many people out as are interested now. So too bad it had to go to ship before we got this, before the attention got where it needed to go.
Yes.
And then there was another question about Black-owned businesses.
I forget. I'm just trying to find the page right now. Where was it? Shit. Somebody was just asking if there's a directory of Black-owned businesses. I'm sorry. I'm going to turn, because I feel like, okay. So Black-owned businesses, there is a directory that has been started for the last 2 years. I wish I could find the actual question right now, and I cannot find, while she's finishing up here, I'll try and paste the link into here. But there's a directory. It's for all of Canada, I think she's trying to do. I am also working on a website that is going to be a long process, but it's going to have a directory of all Black-owned businesses. It's also going to have a directory of all of the organizations within Alberta that are helping Black and Indigenous people in any way. It's also going to be...
People are posting stuff.
It's neither of those, no. I'll find another one. It's in here. Yeah, she started working on this a couple years ago. So I will find it and put it in there. But yeah, so this website is also trying to get us off Facebook as well, or social media. It is a great way to connect with each other right now and share resources. But when you go on there and you read comments and you see things coming up, it's very exhausting to have to read through a lot of the shit and be constantly bullied on there, and the amount of death threats and things we receive just from social media. So I'm trying to find a way to make it kind of bring back like the old MSN, old school MSN a little way. We're going to have our own chat system in there and everything that we can connect. There's going to be a way to see all of the community initiatives happening, because luckily, finally, there's a lot of unity happening. So there's a lot of organizations and businesses that are finally working together. I'm just going to open this up real quick. No, it's not We Buy Black. I'm going to find what it is and put it in there. So yes, there is one. I'm going to put it in there. But if you know of anything, please please share it with me. Send it my way. Anything that would benefit this website. I do build websites, but I also need a lot of help with this. So this is another area allies can help too, is stepping in and taking on some of this work so we can continue doing the work out there that we need to. And sorry, there was something I wanted to say about the other one.
Sorry, I'm posting your groups.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let me look in here real quick. What was it? Oh, the good things that have happened.
Yes.
Okay, so, I mean, number one, people coming out and learning things. I think without holding these community discussions in rural areas, that there would still be a ton. I mean, we still have a lot of backlash now, but we've been able to actually have those conversations and explain white privilege with people, and then they'd be like, oh, yeah, no, I get that now. And then we work together in doing this. I know, again, Keisha Daniels and Caleb Daniels and AJ with Black and Indigenous Alliance Alberta, they are doing, they've been doing weekly protests in Wetaskiwin and Ponoka. Of course, this past week they have not, after what had happened in Red Deer, and they bring letters into City Council every single week, and they're finally getting some response there. And so I think it's just consistency and being persistent and showing up and showing these people we are not going away. We're going to keep showing up until changes are being made. So we are building relationships with town council. We're building relationships with the community, so we can start making actual changes there, rather than just going there for a community discussion and then leaving, and then that's it.
This one more for Miss K. Okay.
Miss K, what courses would you recommend studying in a university to help with leading more social changes?
So it's pretty much, there is no course that is provided by the university. I have worked in universities. I have seen the belly of that beast. Universities, let's be honest, they are corporations. They have financial interests. As long as the purse strings are tied, it's almost impossible to get to that level. I remember, going to a seminar on decolonizing education, and it was very refreshing, because when they were talking about it, it was saying, well, within that academic system, in order to be even considered as a professor, you have to write certain journals that are accepted into other journals in order to be peer reviewed. But if you're speaking from, let's say, the Indigenous perspective, much of that knowledge is oral based. It has protocols around it that differ from each and every single locale and territory. And I'm reminded of a story of, like, with Bobby Kennedy when he was the Attorney General and they were trying desperately to get him to care about the civil rights movement. It wasn't until Bobby Kennedy went down to the South and actually met the people that his life got rattled. That also has a deep history of exploitation and suffering voyeurism, which is not what this is about. It's sort of like about immersing yourself on a daily basis, hourly, by minute, into the cultures and communities. following those protocols. Like, I'm from a different treaty territory, but when I'm on this land, I do my best to follow the protocols as a guest here. Because that's showing respect for that legacy and those thousands of years of knowledge and teachings. And, you know, it would be disgraceful if I were to come in here and just start acting like how we act over, you know, over there. That, you know, it doesn't matter. You have to be respectful. Because I've actually been in sort of these educational models. I have seen how elders are treated in a tokenistic fashion. I have seen that it's just treated like a one-off. I've even seen, you know, 2 white women giving a room of Indigenous people a lecture on Indigenous modality and Indigenous teachings and worldviews, which was extremely confusing when their PowerPoint had an arrow going from elders to the youth, but there was no arrow going back into that circular motion. And when an Indigenous person spoke up about this, they were made quiet because it challenged that infrastructure. You know, my issues right now with regards to universities in terms of their research models is that money that goes towards that research, well, who's giving that money? Who is that research really for? By whom and for whom? Can we really engage in these issues if we use an academic terminology that the average person might not understand, or is that another barrier? You know, even I noticed that privilege, like my privilege of being able to go to university, you know, being able to do that is a privilege that I have. And the thing about that is, like, I think, you know, there's a very distinct difference when you meet somebody who only learned about this stuff in school and someone who's lived it. And somebody who, you know, one of my favorite stories from my work here when I was, since coming to Alberta, you know, I was working as a liaison between an educational group and an elder in the community. And the group was like, oh, we want to do it right. So we had someone teach the proper protocols around honorariums, tobacco, and gift giving, along with many other things for that meeting, to create safety through those protocols, to maintain those boundaries that keep the community safe from people who are exploitative. And it was so funny because, like, I called the elder to ask her, like, what she would like. And she said, without missing a beat, well, I can tell you I don't need another fucking blanket. She's like, I actually need a frying pan. My frying pan got burned. Now, these people would have known that were they in the community. It's almost like without even, it's like, you can't tell people what their experiences are. You have to walk beside them, literally. You will never find this in a theoretical framework. Theoretical frameworks help us look evil back in retrospect, make sense of it in retrospect. But right now is living history. Right now is that living theory. We are going into areas in order to do this successfully where there is no theoretical framework if we do it right. Because all those theoretical frameworks are built on theoretical frameworks of the past that are based in colonization, imperialism, capitalism, and patriarchy. And those systemic issues are built into these university structures. You know, like, once you kind of go into that non-for-profit industrial complex, you start to see that that is actually tethered very closely to the state and religion. But the actual people that are requiring this, their actual concerns get kind of swept under the rug. So, you know, I kind of like, you know, like a 1 semester course on, you know, Indigenous worldviews will not matter, as Gitz was saying, to spending your entire life being immersed in community. You know, I've even seen this in the education system model, where people, in order to get a little teaching experience under their belt, will go to a reserve for a year and then leave it when they get a job in a city. No. Go to a reserve to teach. You should be intending to be a member of that community for the next 25 to 30 years of your life at least. That is what is required of you to build those relationships in a place of trust, because you not only have to move past that history, but you have to challenge yourself on how much, you care. But I don't think, like, especially when it comes to, like, these issues, we can't sanitize them. We can't, throw a bunch of big words on them. We have to live them and feel them. And once you live them and you feel them, it becomes really hard to look at your life and the rest of your life in any other way except to dismantle what we have just taken for granted as being the way things are. And I think as long as you're in one of those institutions, it's very difficult to see outside of the institution because you're still trying to jump through that hoop. You got to go outside of that hoop. You got to go beyond that hoop. You got to not even look at that hoop. And that's kind of like another aspect of that. I just saw on the streets of Boston a robotic surveillance dog that was being used to get facial recognition on protesters that was built and designed at MIT with funding. Same with taser shields, same with taser nets. MIT, need I remind you, is where Noam Chomsky speaks. So I've had friends in the last year quit their jobs as professors because they see that model as a corporate model. So I would say universities are great if you want, that's what you want to do, but to really do it, you got to do it outside of the building, outside of campus for sure.
Okay, so in the comments, I just put the community page. We're gonna do this obviously again because we could talk for a million more years. So, Gitz, is there anything you'd like to say? And we're gonna wrap it up.
Cool. Yeah. So there was one thing that my girlfriend, my wife is Métis, and she pointed out that Black people on the coast denied their land titles. Métis people had land scripts that were taken from them. And Indigenous peoples who are registered under the Indian Act, and we all have to be, who are living on res, don't own the land that they're on. With land comes wealth. And so people, think about this, while your ancestors, and I know one of these things of white comfort, constructing white comfort is well, we were slaves too, we were indentured slaves. Once they passed that point of it, I don't know how bad it was, they were able to purchase land, they were able to purchase houses, they were able to get that, build their empire and pass it on to the next generation. We didn't have that. Didn't have it on the West Coast or the East Coast with I just learned with Taylor about being denied land titles. Métis people didn't have that, and my people still don't have that. And with time, land value goes up. So while white people have been, and Canadians have been passing on intergenerational wealth, we've been inheriting intergenerational oppression, things that are denied to us. We have to fight, and we're still in this fight together. If you look into the chat bar, I just want to add to that last thing about where do you go to get educated? It's definitely not in the school. These are some Indigenous thinkers and some Black thinkers that have really changed my life. Oh, I forgot Asada. Oh my God, I committed the biggest sin. On that list should be Asada Shakur. You want breakdowns. You want to see society as it really is. Asada Shakur is somebody you should look up and read. She's got a lot of amazing stuff. Her life is just incredible. I would take these ones though: Russ Stibo, Pam Palmater, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, John Trudell, Bob Joseph. 2 books you can get: The True Spirit and Original Intent of Treaty 7. It'll give you a really good view of what Indigenous peoples were thinking about and going through at the time of the treaties and why they're important today. American Holocaust will give you some of the crazy insanity that came out of the genocide of America. These histories, their history and our history in Canada, they actually coincide and they run parallel. That is a great book. Generally, I try to stay away from white authors writing about Native stuff, just because it's just so bad. But that book is actually not that bad. It is written by a white guy, an old white guy. Another thing too is you grab all of your books written by Joseph Boyden and you go return those, or you fucking burn them, and then instead you find yourself some Indigenous authors to read from. And there's some over there on the side right there. So boycott Boyden because he's a fucking leech. He's probably the worst kind of leeches we have. He's taking up Indigenous spaces, not Indigenous. And invest yourself in some, and they're not radical thinkers. They're just being honest. So right over there, I'm pretty sure this is it. Just look at those people Oh, this way. Okay. Look over there. Grab the books. Look at they have videos posted on Facebook. Pam does. Russ does. Just research them. And with that, I'm just gonna say, I love all of you, and we will do this again sometime soon.
Skits, before you go, the question is, what was the last author, please? You just mentioned her.
Was it Asada Shakur?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Asada Shakur. Like there's a bunch of whatever level you're thinking of with Malcolm X, with James Baldwin, Dr. John Henrik Clark, who's phenomenal. Like they're here. Women of color writing are fucking like leagues above them. So honestly, like Asada is one of them. And there's so much to get into that. There's a deeper understanding that women of color have for all of us because they're our mothers, and the pain that they feel and the reality they can see is a lot more in depth than a man. And I say this having a daughter, but yeah, they can conceptualize everything a lot better. I would start with Pam and Asada, and then there's other ones you can find as well.
Thank you. So the next one will be 3 hours for sure. We'll definitely give like a full hour for questions because it did take a full hour for questions, and that's great. So many questions, and a lot about what white people can do. And the first thing that you can do as a white person is just acknowledge that there's a problem that you have privilege from, and talk to your other white friends about it. Give them the books that gets just suggested. Just show up like you did today, and show up in person. We social distance, very COVID friendly everywhere we go. Thank you to Taylor. Thank you, Miss K. Thank you, Gits. And we'll close the show. So thank you for coming.